I think we can all agree that 2021 will not go down in the old memory book as folks' favorite year of all time. Despite that, some cool tech came out from one of my favorite tech brands, Apple. But because 2021 was 2021, that favorite tech brand also released some, well, let's charitably call them not so great things. So what wins and what loses in my rankings of the best and worst from Apple this year? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. 2021 had a ton of stuff released from both Apple and all sorts of brands. This will probably be the first in a couple of these as we go through what I really liked this year and what I wasn't that thrilled about. First note I want to mention for this video, no one is sponsoring, nobody provided any of these products to me. This is just all of my personal opinions on the tech that I use on a near daily basis. Also, I've had to have used something for it to count on this list for good or ill. I don't think that's as big of a hurdle for the Apple video because I spend a ton of money buying Apple stuff to show you all for this YouTube channel, but that might be something more relevant in the follow-up videos if we talk about other brands. Look, I really want to stress this next point. This list is my personal opinion. I'm not attacking you specifically if I list something on either the best or the worst list. You are absolutely free and in your own right to like or dislike whatever you want. Just because we don't necessarily see eye to eye doesn't mean either of us are bad people. Well, not for that specific reason, but just, it's okay to like the tech that you like, so long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, etc. Alright, enough meandering around it, let's get to it. Now I'm going to structure this video as honorable and dishonorable mentions leading into the number one best and worst. All that other stuff is good and it is bad, but it's just not bad enough or good enough to win the crown. We're going to do iPhone, iPad, computers, and then we'll finish it off with the winners. So let's start it off with the honorable mentions for the best iPhone thing of the year. I have to give it to the iPhone 13 mini. Though it might end up being on the chopping block in the 2022 product lineup, I'm really impressed with Apple for really taking every single problem with last year's 12 mini and updating it to fix almost everything that I had a problem with on that older phone. It's got a far better camera than almost any previous iPhone. Seriously, this is the camera that was exclusive to the 12 Pro Max, and now we've got it on the smallest, cheapest iPhone. This darn little pocketable and affordable phone has a better wide-angle camera than most point-and-shoot actual cameras. And don't forget, if you want to find a point-and-shoot camera that is better than this, it's going to be much bigger and much more expensive. Plus, they were able to increase the battery life to make the phone usable. Now, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and that is one of the reasons why it didn't end up with the crown at the end of this list, but that hour and a half extra can really be felt in the phone, and it makes it very obvious that you don't need to worry or ration the battery life as much. You don't have to worry about it as much, but you do have to worry about rationing that battery, and that's why it keeps it from being the perfect phone. I really hope Apple keeps this around when we start talking about the iPhone 14 lineup, because the mini is really a return to the days when phones could easily fit in your pocket and not the monster behemoths that we've got today. So that was good, but the iPhones had some things that weren't so good, so let's talk about the dishonorable mention for the worst thing on the iPhones this year. Again, subjective list. I'm sure there's a ton of stuff they did wrong this year, and the big one is actually the winner of the whole video. The macro switching was really close to replacing this mention, but I've got to give my dishonorable mention to the worst iPhone thing to Apple holding back Apple Pro RAW from the 13 and 13 mini. Yes, I understand that something has to make a phone Pro for the Pro and Pro Max, but I really don't like it when companies hold back software features behind higher end price tags. If you don't know what Apple Pro RAW is, it's a photography setting that combines the benefit of taking a raw photograph, which is lots of room to edit the photo later if you want to, and all the benefits of computational photography, which is getting a lot of that picture right in camera so you don't need to mess with it later. And I get it that sounds like a contradiction. That shouldn't be all that impressive, but honestly, I really like Pro RAW in my 13 Pro Max. I have my phone always set to use Pro RAW. It makes taking photos so much easier because it really allows you to decide later. Yes, this picture looks great and I don't need to mess with it, or okay, I do need to bring up the shadows a little bit. Maybe the highlights are a little too high. It lets you tweak a surprising amount with simple tools like the photo app. So you don't have to worry, okay, do I shoot RAW now? Can I just shoot regular? You don't have to worry about that at all. I held my tongue about this last year when it was released because it was new and maybe they couldn't make it work on the smaller phones. But the smaller phones this year have the A15 processor, so the computing power is not what's holding this feature back. Now it's Apple. And nothing drives me more crazy than a company holding back software features. And it's more irritating because Apple generally doesn't do this. You'll notice a trend in this video where the things that irritated me most were the things that I like, and then it was just like twisted or disappointing somehow. Let's move on to the tablets. First off, for honorable mentions, I've got to give my honorable mention in the iPad field to the ultra-wide front-facing camera that debuted with the M1 iPad Pro. Holy crap, I think this camera is literally a game changer for teleworking or collaborating remotely. People toss around game changer like candy here on YouTube, and the term itself has lost a lot of its oomph, but I'm telling you, this is such an impressive piece of tech, and I personally use it as often as possible. This week, I've used it every single day because I'm in some kind of meeting or some kind of briefing all of the time. It took a tablet that I was pretty meh about, the new iPad mini, and has turned this into a device that I always have with me. You don't need the iPad mini. You can find this updated camera right now on 4 of the current iPad models: the 12.9 and 11-inch M1 iPad Pros, the iPad mini, and the iPad Generation 9. This camera makes attending meetings, events, briefings just so easy. Laptops and tablets have had front-facing cameras for a long time, and it's not all that impressive, you might say. But because of how wide this camera is, you can put your iPad basically anywhere on a table and you'll be good. You don't have to do weird gymnastics or move your computer too far away to get yourself in the shot. Plus, this comes with Apple's center stage feature that allows for, it's not a real zoom, but allows for zooming in or zooming out depending on how many people are in the frame and what the focus is. It does this all for you. You don't have to worry about it. The image is not as crisp as the cameras from the iPhone, but it's a teleconferencing tool. It doesn't need to be that crisp or have tons of dynamic range. It has to be good enough and easy enough to use. And fam, this is more than good enough, and it's the easiest to use. I love it. Moving on to the dishonorable mentions for the iPad. This one was kind of tough because I don't exactly think there's anything wrong with the iPads as they stand today. So it's not really the worst of Apple, but it's a problem because they didn't explain their rationale, and it was fairly confusing for both returning buyers and absolutely confusing for first-time buyers. I'm talking about the memory controversy of the M1 iPad Pro lineup. If you don't know what I'm talking about, depending on the amount of storage you buy on the iPad Pro, you could get a model with 6 gigabytes of RAM or a model with 16 gigabytes of RAM. 1 terabyte storage and up models get more, 256 and 512 get less. And what's crazy is the performance difference with just the 8 gigabytes of RAM was more than the 6 gigabytes that you could get on previous models of the iPad Pro. And they could have just left it there. They could have said nothing and nobody would have known, but instead they confused everybody by including an option with double the RAM. And even though they made mention that it wasn't a specific upgrade, that doesn't stop that from confusing folks, because generally bigger numbers mean better performance. I mean, why would you include it if it didn't have some use, right? And it shortly came out afterwards that iPadOS was incapable of even using that 16 gigabytes of memory that you just bought. So something that should have been a, oh hey, that's a neat to know thing from teardowns, became a very irritating exercise in trying to read into the future potential pro level applications and other things that a 16 gigabyte RAM model of an iPad Pro could herald. In the future, just don't tell us how much RAM is in the iPad, because honestly, it doesn't matter and nobody really cares because it doesn't affect how you use the device on a day-to-day basis. iPadOS is so well optimized, you could use almost any amount of RAM and it will feel like the fastest computer you've ever used. Next up, the best and worst honorable mentions for the MacBooks. This might end up becoming a whole video by itself because there's some things that I got to say, but at least let's get something on paper here. I'd have to give the honorable mention to the M1 Max processor. I'm not one to get all big-eyed and impressed with gigantic comparisons and bar charts, but no kidding, the M1 Max processor is a mind-bogglingly powerful processor. You've all probably seen the charts and seen the graphs, so I won't dwell on them too much other than to say that while the M1 Pro processor, at least the 8-core model, is only a bit of an upgrade in power, the M1 Max 32-core GPU model is on a whole other level as far as laptop power goes and easily makes the M1 Max MacBook Pro 16 the single most powerful laptop that I've ever owned. And yes, I mean more powerful than dedicated gaming laptops that are bigger, have bigger fans, and have bigger power adapters because they need more power. I have the gaming laptops, I'm looking at their boxes right now. Judging judging from all the angry Apple comments that I get on TikTok, there are folks that straight up won't believe this no matter how many people tell them, but team, this processor is legitimate. Not only that, but because the M1 Max motherboard has new Thunderbolt 4 headers installed, we get so much more capability out of these laptops than we ever did with the M1 standard. The power is good, but the quality of life improvements are so much better. But all that power sometimes can't be used, and the dishonorable mention for the 2021 MacBooks for the worst of Apple is macOS Monterey and its functionality with external monitors and external memory. Yes, the monitor thing has been mostly fixed for me with macOS 12.1, but my problem with my RAID storage remains. Basically, there is a new setting or new system inside of Monterey that puts drives to sleep very rapidly when not in use. If you're primarily using solid-state drives, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal because of how fast a solid-state drive is able to go from nothing to reading and writing. However, I use a RAID 5 configuration, and it's such a pain in the butt to use my M1 Max MacBook Pro when it's connected to my RAID. Everything goes so slow because the drives have to spin up from scratch every single time I stop using it for longer than a few seconds. And apparently, everything on the Mac needs to check all external drives at all times. I've unchecked the option in the power system that turns off drives all the time, but it still does it. What makes this the most frustrating is I do not have the same problem with my M1 Mac Mini running macOS Big Sur. So it's 100% a Monterey problem, and it means for my YouTube workflow, I can't use the new computers because averaged out, it's slower than my M1 Mac Mini. Seriously, and yes, I will probably make a whole video covering this because it irritates me more than anything Apple has done since macOS Catalina. It's very strongly making me consider moving over to my custom-built PC for my video editing. Okay, we have finally made it to the actual winners of the seriously best and seriously worst from Apple in 2021, according to Gary, the Everyday Dad. I'm a pretty positive person, so let's start off with the best. Easily the best thing Apple has done so far this year for me is the chassis of the new MacBooks. Now that might not sound as exciting as 32-core GPU or 10-core CPU, but this chassis is basically my perfect laptop. We've now got HDMI, SD cards, 3 Thunderbolt 4 with so much external display support. Magsafe, which is good because I'm a klutz. It's like Apple watched all of my M1 standard videos and then they wrote down all of my complaints and just fixed them all with one laptop. Seriously, this is the best laptop body design I've ever seen. It's the perfect blend of new and old, and if they get that external drive thing figured out, this will absolutely be the only computer I use because it's powerful as all heck, but it's also usable and quality of life is all heck, and quality of life is the most important thing for me on a computer. Okay, drumroll please. The worst thing Apple did in 2021 should probably come as no surprise because I can almost guarantee that I put it in the thumbnail, and that is the MagSafe battery charger. This thing should have been a home run, and in full disclosure, I don't think it's that bad of a charger, but it's hampered in some hilariously bad ways. And I don't like saying that because I am a project manager and I currently have several products in development, and it would hurt me greatly to see somebody make fun of that and say how bad it was on the internet. I don't blame the people that made this. I blame the people that came up with the requirements for this. First, the price. Holy crap, $99 for an external battery? That's mustache twirling villain in a children's movie high price. That's Muppet villain taking back the farm because you can't afford payments levels of overpriced. That's the reason people talk about an Apple tax overpriced. For a single use battery, and single use means that it only does one thing, not that it can only be used one time, TikTok, that's at least half too high. If we wanted to talk real money numbers, this should be in like the $40, $50 price range. Second, it's an external battery, but it can only charge your iPhone or other wireless device. The only wireless device that I carry around is my iPhone, so what else can I do with this? This is now just a lump that fits in my bag. This should have had at least a single USB-C out anywhere on the body here. There are batteries with more capacity, having faster charging out, cost less than this, and they're not that much bigger. Why this bothers me so much is I asked for this for a whole year. When the iPhone 12s came out with MagSafe, I immediately wanted a battery that did this exact thing to work with it. But this should have so many more capabilities and not cost nearly this much. For charging a phone, sure, it's great, but there are so many other things out there that do better than this for less. It's the things that disappoint you the most that hurt the worst. right? The MagSafe Battery, you take my #1 worst thing Apple did in 2021. Congratulations. But what about you? What was your favorite and least favorite thing from Apple this year? Let me know in the comments below, because I can't be the only one to have such contrasting opinions. Apple did some of the best stuff this year, and they did some of the most irritating stuff this year. So what was yours? And if you like this video and you want to get into the Apple ecosystem, good news. Here is my video showing the most useful ecosystem that you can buy for yourself, and you can find it by clicking right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.